Still got it. You know, I used to love playing basketball at my parents' house. Haven't shot on that hoop for a while, as you can see. But I played basketball for many years, about 5th grade through my senior year in high school. It was my sport. I was pretty good at it. At least I thought I was good at it. And basketball is one of those things that can be a little bit intense. Sometimes you're the only one that everybody in the whole gym is watching. I remember shooting free throws sometimes, and I would be standing there by myself, a couple hundred people in the stands, all the other players watching, and it's just you, and it's quiet. And you have two people to talk to when it's quiet and you're shooting free throws. One is yourself, and the other is God. Sometimes you see a lot of professional basketball players pray a little prayer or do something like this before they shoot the free throw. And I remember that when I sometimes would go up to the free throw line, I would stop for a second, I would pause, take a breath, and I'd say, okay, God, here we go. And I would pray, just a real quick prayer. I didn't get down on my knees, I didn't do anything crazy, but I would say a prayer. And in the book of Nehemiah, as we're studying it, as you just read, Nehemiah says a real quick little prayer. And so let me just bring you up to speed, though, on what's happening in the book of Nehemiah. First chapter that we covered last week, we got this guy named Nehemiah. It's an Old Testament book, and he is the cupbearer to King Artaxerxes, okay? So he's a cupbearer. He's a pretty high-level official in this guy's kingdom, but he gets really upset because he hears about Jerusalem, which is the city where his people are from. He's Jewish, and he cares about his people. And the city of Jerusalem is in ruins, and he's upset, and he goes, God, I don't know what to do. I need to do something about this. And then we find ourselves today in chapter 2, and I want to read a few verses for you that you already read, but we'll read the beginning of chapter 2. It goes like this. In the month of Nisan, in the 20th year of King Artaxerxes. So if you drive a Toyota or a Ford, don't be offended that it says Nissan in the Bible. But the reason that it has to mention that month is because in the very first verse of the book of Nehemiah, it says in the month of Kislev, in the 20th year, okay? Now what we know is that there are 4 months that took place between the first chapter and the second chapter in Nehemiah. So let me keep reading. He says, in the month of Nisan, in the 20th year of King Artaxerxes, when wine was brought before him, I took the wine and gave it to the king. I had not been sad in his presence before, so the king asked me, why does your face look so sad when you are not ill? This can be nothing but sadness of heart. And I was very much afraid. But I said to the king, may the king live forever. Why should my face not look sad when the city where my fathers are buried lies in ruins and its gates have been destroyed by fire? I want to stop there for a second. Why would Nehemiah be afraid to be sad in front of the king? Weird thing. In this day, it was actually illegal to be sad in front of the king. The king was such a high up official, he could have you killed for any reason that he wanted. You better not be sad in his presence, because that would make the king kind of negative, and nobody wants a negative king because then you get people killed. So it was not good to be negative or sad in front of the king. That's why Nehemiah was so scared that but he couldn't help but show his emotion. He was upset. And then, here's the verse I wanted to talk to you about. Verse 4, so the king said to me, what is it that you want? And then I prayed to the God of heaven, and I answered the king. Now, it doesn't say much about what his prayer looked like. I think it was kind of like a free throw prayer. It was real quick. He only had a second, maybe 2, before he had to answer the king. But he made sure that in that moment, he was going to depend on God and not himself. Now, there's a few different ways that we should pray. Many of you have taken an exam, or you're in sports, or you're about to ask some girl to go on a date, and you throw up a little Hail Mary prayer. Okay, God, I hope this works. And the Bible doesn't say that that's wrong. The only thing that would be wrong with that is if that's all you do in terms of prayer. But I think what we need to notice here is that those 4 months between when he first heard about Jerusalem and then when he finally asked the king, what do you think Nehemiah was doing for those 4 months? He was spending significant time in prayer. So sometimes there's short little bits, okay, God, I need your help. Sometimes there's long prayers. I remember when I broke up with my girlfriend, her name is Crystal, she's now my wife, and I would spend a long time really praying that, okay, God, I really want this girl back. I gotta figure out my life. I really miss her, and I would beg God for a long time, and I would get down on my knees and I would ask God to change my circumstances. And that's a long prayer. Nehemiah spent 4 months in long prayers, but he also spent time in short little prayers. So my first question for you guys is, well, what does your prayer life look like? How dependent on God are you? Nehemiah knew the answer to the king, but he said before he answered the king, he prayed. He made sure to place the authority on God. If anything was going to happen, it was going to be under God's control, and he wanted to make sure that that was true. Okay? So I want you to talk about that in your groups, and then I want you to skip down with me to verse 19. So what happens in that whole chapter is that sure enough, the king let him go, and he got things going in Jerusalem. He went there, he surveyed the damage, went to the city to try to figure out what was wrong and what he needed to do. But then you find in verse 19 the first resistance that Nehemiah comes across. And that's in verse 19. It says, when Sanballat the Horonite, Tobiah the Ammonite official, and Geshem the Arab heard about it. Here's a little trick. If you don't know how to say one of the names in the Bible, just read it confidently and clearly and keep going, and nobody will ever know that you don't know how to say it. But they mocked and ridiculed us. This is what Nehemiah says. They mocked and they ridiculed us. What is it that you are doing, they asked. Are you rebelling against the king? And I answered them by saying, the God of heaven will give us success. We, his servants, will start rebuilding. But as for you, you have no share in Jerusalem or any claim or history right to it. I want to give you a little phrase. Effective prayer will lead to opposition. We talked about prayer first. Nehemiah was a man of God. He wanted to pray. He wanted to give God the authority over his life and his circumstances. But effective prayer should lead and will lead to opposition. So my question for you is this. Does anyone know that you're a follower of Christ? And maybe you're here tonight and you would say, well, no, because I'm not. And by the way, thank you for being here. And I hope that you can find this place to be something that you can talk about and have a conversation with others that might be in a different place than you. But if you are a follower of Christ, does anyone know that? Does anyone see the effectiveness of your prayer life? Has anybody seen anything in your life that says, wow, this guy or this girl really understands their faith and they're serious about praying to God? Because effective prayer will lead to opposition. And we're going to see that over the course of the book of Nehemiah. But my question to you is, does anybody even notice your faith? Does anybody even notice that you might pray, or that God might be a part of your life, or that the church matters to you? Or is it something that's hidden in the background? For Nehemiah, that was not an option. His faith was public. He could have gotten killed for it in front of the king, and now when he gets to Jerusalem, he's going to get ridiculed for it, because Nehemiah was not a private man. His faith was a public thing. I hope you have a great discussion.